Hi, this is Andrew Turner, the host and founder of the G&T Sessions podcast. And this afternoon we have a fantastic guest, Mr. David Brear. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much for having me.
So obviously this week's a bit of a different week, but obviously today is quite a good celebration day. So I don't know if you know, David, I'm actually half Irish. I'm a half Irishman, half Yorkshireman, which is an interesting combination. So my little surprise is that obviously I can't have a day today, you see, without having a pint of Guinness. So there we go.
Very nice.
So today, it's not the G&T sessions, it's the Guinness and technology sessions, yeah? However,
good. Very nice.
In future, we will be having one of these, yeah, which is obviously a Hendrix and tonic. So cheers, David.
Cheers.
I know you're sipping it on your water there, and being a good boy over there, are you?
You are. I am for now, but I think part of self-isolation is definitely a gin and tonic here and there. So that sounds good.
So, as a bit of an introduction, what's could you introduce yourself? What actually do you do day to day? What gets you up in the morning? What motivates you to get out of the bed in the morning?
Yeah, sure. So I am the CEO over at a little company called 11FS. What gets me out of bed? At this stage is usually my daughter about 6 a.m. like clockwork. But in terms of the work that I do, we just love solving problems. We're a 4-year-old startup who was founded because really we felt that financial services had sort of lost its way a little bit. My background, I've sort of been at big tech companies or consultancies, management consultancies, big banks, big insurers. And the reality that I've sort of faced into is, people are spending billions and billions of pounds and unfortunately not really achieving a great deal. And that's quite a sad thing to see because you've got people who really are passionate about solving real problems for consumers, just really inhibited by what their organizations allow them to do. So from our perspective, we thought that, we were founded on the principle that digital banking is only really 1% finished. And despite seeing trillions of pounds being spent globally, then actually there's probably a better way of making that happen.
So you're only 4 years old. That's quite interesting. I thought you were longer than that.
Yeah, April we're approaching rapidly our 4th birthday, so it's both the shortest 4 years of my life because I've been having a lot of fun, but also the longest as well.
So you're like a toddler. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to go through that difficult, awkward teenage phase at some point, I'm sure.
But your background, though, as you mentioned, you've actually been in big corporates. So you've obviously been on the institution side before you actually started, and obviously you must have seen something that triggered your reason to create something like 11FS. What was the trigger for that?
Yeah, for me, it's, having been client side and consultancy and agency side, you sort of start seeing the industry from lots of different angles, really. And I sort of often draw a diagram called the banking galaxy diagram, which for me sort of highlights it isn't really the bank's fault, just theirs. But when you've got consultancies and design houses and research houses who are sort of set up slightly antagonistic to the people that they're trying to help, their business models are based on things taking a long period of time and costing a lot of money. That's not really helpful. It's like having a doctor who never really wants the patient to get fit. It becomes a quite a difficult situation because really. If your business model is predicated on things working in a certain way, you're very, very rare do organizations be able to make those leaps or those changes. And that's not just the banks, but it's Accenture and KPMG and Deloitte and these guys. The world sort of needs to evolve and needs to change because fundamentally digital has brought about a material shift. It's a small team sport. It's not about having 10,000 people who could. It's about 15 people who will. And this is why FinTech and startups are able to do so much more than big players can, because they get that it's just fundamentally about culture and talent.
Well, so I suppose you're kind of saying it's a bit like applying the kind of Jeff Bezos two pizza model to how you do digital banking. Is that how you describe it, or is it a bit more than that?
Very much so. Yeah, I think there's. I mean, I think anything where anybody said anything those types of things is usually where it's they're trying to fight with biases. Essentially, Jeff Bezos saying that what he was trying to fight against wasn't ordering more pizzas, it was people hiring people they didn't need to hire, right? It's like Google saying move fast.
It's right. It's like right sizing the team, isn't it? Basically.
Yeah. But like say Google saying move fast and break things actually wasn't really saying break things. It was they had really, really passionate but very, very particular engineers who would be perfectionists in what they're doing. So the bias they needed to shift was not just pontification, but action. So for us, it's about, well, how do you create that balance? How do you take startup mentality, startup methodologies, and apply them against really big organizational problems?
But then, so I suppose that, but as a consulting intervention model, I suppose that it's then, are you still a private company? Because I think that's the thing that you're still
completely privately held. Yeah. I mean, one of the best things I think that we've ever done is we've literally taken no funding from anybody. Our ability to make decisions and move quickly on things means we can make decisions and move really quickly. That's that doesn't mean we've created a I am not 11FS's benevolent leader. This is not a dictatorship. If anything, we work in a more commitment-based culture than any company I've ever kind of come across, because I feel from my perspective, if I have to make every decision and I have to be involved in everything, we will only be able to do so much and we'll only be able to grow so quickly.
It will scale.
Yeah. I mean, it's the I think the quote is always if you want people to build a boat, you don't make them shout at them and tell them what to do. You make them yearn for the sea, right? So from our perspective, culture and talent and focusing really, really heavily on both of those things is what's made us abnormally successful. Because whether it's in the middle of a project, whether it's due to coronavirus, whatever the circumstances happening, I'm 100% confident that our team take the right action and they move the best thing forward in the best way that they can. And that doesn't mean we do everything perfect all the time, but it knows that we always work to positive intent from everybody. And that's something that I think a lot of companies really struggle with.
So I suppose, I mean, that's really good to hear, because I think my observation working with some of the SIs and larger engagement and services models is that they kind of get into this thing where they have to have this year-on-year growth model, and this they have to increase the footprint in the account, et cetera, and does that compromise their values and their mission? And actually, do they make the right decisions around that engagement? It sounds like that you sounds like you actually shape up an engagement to say we will do this, but you'd rather do a certain size of engagement, but then for multiple clients rather than doing one big transformation for one client. Is that kind of the model you're trying to do, or?
I mean, it really depends. It really depends on the type of client and the things that they're looking to achieve. I mean, we work with really big banks. We work with small FinTech players. I mean, over in Singapore, we're working with Grab to build out a banking proposition over there as well. So, I mean, it's tech companies, it's FS plays. It really depends on where they're at. I think one of the consistent things of the people that we do work with, though, is we sort of have to be culturally aligned, because a lot of what we do, whether it's building a brand new bank for somebody, or rethinking how they do customer segmentation. I mean, the amount of old segmentation models that you see that are based on. I mean, we've done a number of SME banks now, but you look at people who are just classifying customers on the amount of money that they make. But actually, if you
it's
treat
like just one dimension, basically one character.
I mean, if you treat a professional services company at the same time as a manufacturing company, they require fundamentally different help. A lot of it, I mean, I've sort of said this a few times before, but I think a big part of it is helping get love back in the relationship to a certain degree. No company started in the world, I think, without a real deep passion for solving a real problem. And I think financial services has just sort of lost that passion for really solving customer problems over the last 200 years of being ridiculously successful. So I think one of the differences I sort of see as well is like we're very empathetic to the challenges because we've been on that side of the fence, right? We've been a banker. We understand how hard this is, but equally with the companies that we've shown that this stuff is possible to change, then if we can do it in these places, you can do it anywhere, really.
It's interesting because so you said that you believe it's only 1% complete, and what do you base that on? What's the evidence that says it's only 1% complete? Because that's a pretty bold statement. That's all.
It is. I mean, if you look at just basics from a technological perspective, the advancements, the innovations and commoditization of technology is happening at a faster pace in the industry than it ever has done. If you look outside of that, then actually the regulatory framework for global organizations, but also in the UK or the US or Australia or Hong Kong, is progressing so quickly. Just based on other industries and what they're doing, customers' expectations is rising exponentially. So for us, seeing people, it's like if you ever saw Alice in Wonderland, they had a theory that was the Red Queen's race. Which was the theory that you had to run as quickly as you possibly can just to stand in the same place. And this is where many really big organizations find themselves because, banks, again, through, a couple of 100 years of mergers and acquisitions and being really, really successful, now find themselves in a place where margins are getting squeezed and unit economics is getting harder. And the whole
it's a bit like a Frankenstein's monster as well, isn't it? Because they've actually bolted on all these different branches, all these different, assets, etc. It's quite complicated. Yeah,
I mean, fundamental principles of universal banking, where you see the customer and you can cross-sell and upsell, is just removing with more and more intermediaries. So, the principles of banking are changing, but also because of all of those mergers and acquisitions and for never really decommissioning systems, they've got multiple monolithic architecture that sits in the back office of these things. And because of that, they've got operating costs, which are just becoming astronomical, And I mean, people like Wells Fargo are out there, they say it's $9 billion a year just to kind of keep the lights on. That is just an extraordinary amount of money.
$9 billion.
$9 billion, being spent on IT every year. I mean, Lloyd's Banking Group have come out and said they're spending $5 billion over the next 5 years, I think it is. But it's just alarming. So, when
the funniest quote I got, though, one of my previous guests, Jonathan McGuinness, I don't know if you know him, he's ex-UBS, he's done a few things, and he said it's a bit like, his analogy of systems within banks, it's a bit like having a typewriter behind the wall, and then an iPad in front of the wall, because they kind of like, it looks glossy on the outside, but then when you go behind, it's actually it's all this manual typewriter kind of thing.
It is like that.
It's an extreme example, but I think it sounds like you know exactly somewhere the dead bodies are.
The hard thing with that as well is everybody knows this. There's no IT department in a bank who's like, no, I think mainframe and COBOL is the way forward. It's the future. People get this, but it becomes it doesn't become rational. It becomes irrational because for every one of those monoliths, you're talking about 20 layers in an architecture. And for every one of those layers, you're talking about a different supplier. And for every one of those different suppliers, you're talking about different contractual terms and a procurement process. So if you're the if you're the CEO of a major bank right now, your ability to stand back and solve this problem is almost impossible, because you've got to write off maybe a couple of £1 billion on the ROI from an investment you've made into a platform. You've got to align the procurement process to do these things. And then next step, you've got a bunch of technology providers who are only maybe 1 or 2 steps ahead of the bank to advise you as well. So it becomes a really difficult thing. But, this is the beautiful thing about doing this now, is we've got FinTech players coming in who, in a big bank, it used to be 6 monthly releases. I mean, now if a big bank's doing monthly releases, it's a big deal. But you've got Monzo and Starling who can go from a good idea to it being released to millions of customers in 2 to 3 weeks. They're doing 100 releases a day to live using continuous testing, continuous integration capability. And these things just don't exist. I mean, these are things that are standard in other industries, but when it comes to financial services, because of people put financial services on this pedestal that it's so heavily regulated, and you can't kind of mess with these things. But I mean, I always say to people, I'm like, the health industry is so much more regulated. Creation of new drugs and the pharmaceutical industry is so much more regulated, and if you get that wrong, people die. But they're still doing huge amounts of learning and development. They're still investing so much in R&D, bringing new, better drugs to fix weirder and more wonderful diseases. So banking is less regulated.
But is it because let me be contentious? Is it because the returns in the banking and financial services industry and the leadership? Yeah. So if you look at the age and the tenure of the leadership, usually they've been, some have been a man and boy, in decades in the organisation. How technology savvy are they? Yeah, you sound pretty technology savvy, to be honest with you, as a CEO. I know you've obviously been in a few different places, but they don't understand. They don't understand what to do. Yeah, and they don't want to. A senior leadership position. They do. How do you be authentic to say, actually, guys, I don't actually know what you're talking about. Yeah, but I know we've got a big problem. Yeah, so is it kind of human thing of stay as long as you stay in that position as long as you can, milk it as long as you can, and then then work out, is there a transition plan? But actually, to pass it on to somebody else. I mean, I'm being a bit contentious there, but
I think there's definitely something in that. I think I have seen that change. Definitely in the past, I have seen organizations that the project plan leads all the way up to the point where the guy retires, right? But equally, I've seen organizations that are set out to do it in a better way than that. I think particularly if you look in the UK right now, there are new CEOs coming into organizations, and with that, actually what they're trying to do is sort of give legacy a better name, because if you look at the people like Alison Rose at Natwest, there are changes at Tesco Bank, there are changes at Santander, there is changes kind of all over the place that for me are bringing in people that actually have to plan for the next 20 years, not just hope they don't have to deal with the mess in 2. So it's interesting to see that change there, but
because you've got a mix. You see, haven't you? You've got you mentioned Monzo and Starling. They had no legacy. Yeah, they kind of Megan Kay Wood and Anne Bowden and obviously Tom and people like that at Monzo, they were obviously they had a white blank sheet of paper to a certain extent. I know you were kind of involved in that, but then obviously people like Goldman Sachs and the other guys, and the HSBC, they've actually got to create a new digital bank from scratch, and they've got to work out what traverses from the old bank, if anything, and then what's what's the new patterns of actually operation. And there's also obviously an education process as well. So it's quite a big. It seems like it depends where you are. I suppose what your starting point is about how big that journey is.
Yeah, I mean, we sort of often say to people, I mean, the best advice we can give anybody. I mean, if you look at any technology player, if you look at Apple as a really good example, every 2 years the laptop is completely new. It might look slightly similar, but it is completely new. The operating system, the chips, the boards, the
screen,
the everything that is with it. Everything is completely different. The problem that you have there is just taking customers with you. For a bank, everything is built forever. They build things more like houses than they do software or hardware. My background, when I sort of got into this side of the fence, as opposed to playing sports, which was what I used to do, was hardware engineering and software engineering. So I started in the, what can this stuff do? And then gravitated to what can this stuff do for people? And for me, I think if you...
Exactly, because I was going to ask you, is your background, did you just fall into tech, or did you actually say, this looks pretty interesting, I want to get involved in it, or was it just become part of your job, or how did that start? What's the segue?
My background, I was playing basketball. I was playing at a pretty decent level. I played 11 county sports when I was younger. So very sort of sporty, running around, doing all sorts of stuff. Unfortunately, one bad move and 3 ligaments in my left knee torn. I had to get a proper job. Thankfully, the same year when I was 5, the same year that I was bought my first basketball, I was also bought my first computer, which was a Amstrad 1512 at the time. And, so my dad was really into computing. I pivoted from sports science and human biology and trained to be a physiotherapist and fall back after playing sports to doing business, computing and maths. So what's been phenomenal though, if I'm honest, I learned more about business through sports and more about management through sports than being in any business or doing any course. I think
like
that you
peak performance and stuff like that, and motivating and inspiring people and all that kind of stuff.
100%. How you treat everybody as an individual, whether it's in an opponent or whether it's a team a team member. Really, I think sports people are great at reading situations. The best sports people, it is subconscious behavior. And I think if you can bring that into the business sense, and actually at 11FS, we deploy a lot of sort of sports psychology thinking, and actually the approaches that we've taken to performance management or the creation of our values that we stand by and what they mean to everybody, how we, stupid stuff like, performance management at big organizations is something that happens every year, where your manager can't remember what you did in the first 2 halves of the first 2 quarters of the year. And it becomes a conversation where they sort of have privileged information about you, and it's about why you're not getting the bonus you think you should do, right? In a sports sense, if you're a striker of a football team and they leave it till the end of the year to tell you that you're not doing a good job, it just makes no bloody sense. So
you got continuous feedback. Yeah, continuous feedback.
100%. Yeah, we talk about in-play feedback all the time. Like, actually, we presume positive intent in everybody, and actually, we work really closely to unleash their potential. We say our vision is about changing the fabric of financial services, but our mission in life is just to unleash talent. And actually, if we can really focus on unleashing that talent, I think it comes back to what you said earlier on about account plans and depth of relationship and all that type of stuff. Look, I obviously we're creating a business, it's a profitable business, but I don't think if you focus on revenue, I think you limit what you actually focus on. But
I think what you're touching on is that the traditional approach is to do that kind of data scientific way of year-on-year planning, saying, okay, we want a 25% uplift on that account, we want a 50% uplift on that account. I've never, I've run consultancies, but many years ago. I'm more of a software kind of telco guy in my background, and obviously done a bit of banking with Tesco Bank. But the thing is that what I think you're saying is that you have a more kind of, what's the impact plan on that business? What's the how do we change the customer experience? How do we become a world-class customer experience? How do you create some lasting assets? How do you help them create a lasting culture? That's kind of, it's that kind of more intangible stuff It's a bit like you talked about on LinkedIn this morning about the cultures and stuff that people want to talk about, but it's that stuff that people don't know least about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's
People focus too much on outputs and not enough on outcomes. So for me, I always say revenue for me is just like the sun. Like you want it to be there, you want the warmth from it, but you just don't look directly at it. If you focus on it, it becomes a distraction and probably quite damaging to you. If you focus on doing really, really great, impactful work, it's why I always say it's like, look, if you there's only three things you kind of need to set up with people. It's culture, talent, and purpose. If you get the culture of your organization right, you bring together the right group of people and you give them purpose, all the other good stuff kind of happens. But if you focus on revenue and that's your, if your objective is revenue, you're going to find it really difficult to make that sustainable.
Yes, I mean, what you're talking about is hearts and minds, basically. As I would call it.
Very much so. Very much so. And people taking accountability, right? It's I go back to on the values and the cultural side of things. If it's always senior management pushing things uphill, then actually you never fulfill that potential. If your team are fundamentally driving forward the things that they are accountable for, we're a big believer in decision making to the edges and actually disseminating responsibility.
So empowering people in the kind of in the front line, effectively. So pushing rather than being this autocratic kind of triangle organization.
100%.
So back to your history though. So you said you kind of got involved in computers with the Amstrad, and then obviously. So it sounds like you've also done institutional jobs. You said you've done consultancy. You've also done what agency work. So you've worked for what marketing agencies as well. You're a bit of a mashup of different experiences. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of took it upon myself to try and go on a bit of a safari around financial services, really. So I figured the best way to really understand the industry was to view it from all of the different angles. So I worked at a usability agency, a big insurance company, a big bank, a big Indian offshoring company, a really large management consultancy. So whether it was Gartner, Infosys, Foolproof, Aviva, Lloyds Banking Group, actually, if you can view the problem that is financial services from many different angles,
different lenses, you kind of get that unique insight, don't you? So you can spot things that are going to happen from a different perspective.
And in summary, it's 1% finished.
So obviously, as part of your journey. Because obviously there's this phrase I would call it peaks and valleys. So obviously people usually talk about their peaks. Yeah, they talk about, I did this job, then I did this role. There's this high, there's this mountain that I climbed. This mountain. What would you say have been your valleys? Have you had any valleys, or is that? I mean, obviously you talked about your injury when you were hoping to be a basketball, be the basketball star of the UK or globally. But obviously that's kind of a bit of a valley. But have you had any valleys during your business career that you think would be worth sharing with the audience?
I mean, I have to say, in terms of like advice to sort of young people getting into the industry, I think people look for peaks, but actually I think people learn more from valleys, if I'm honest with you. I mean, I joined a big bank in 2008, May. Which for anybody who's a historian was like, that was an interesting time to get into banking, like actually moving to a bank just as the crisis really kicked off. But I'd say over those 6 years I was at Lloyds Banking Group, I learned an amazing amount because, when everything is up in the air, you get a huge amount of opportunity to be the people who can step forward and fix it. I mean, I definitely say I've learned more from places where things weren't perfect. Because essentially you learn what you want it to be when you've got the opportunity to do it for yourselves. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we're putting in place at 11FS now on the values and the cultural side of things have come from places where things haven't been perfect. I think if you're new to an industry and you go work at Apple or Google where everything is wonderful, then I think your ability to be impactful is lost, and the things that you'll probably learn are going to be much less impressive as well. So, I mean, I've loved it in the valleys, like, you know, down there getting dirty and all of the problems is where actually I think I've probably excelled most. Really, I'd say, you know, my superpower really is it execution. Like I mean, right. The difference between the switch that kind of went off in my head at one point was really my background. You know, I was naturally just good at sports, so I just played sports. But actually, it was, you know, I came out of my undergrad degree in computing with a 2-1 and suddenly realized actually about 100,000 other people had a 2-1 in computing. And what was going to make me different, what was going to make me unique, right? What I realized was just working harder than everybody else possibly around you is the differentiator in life. And it sounds, it's not going to make a medium post, or it's not going to be a diet revolution or an industry revolution, but genuinely, I've just worked harder than everybody else around me. I did that on my post-grad. I got a double first, and I've just deployed that for the rest of my career. Try and be as self-aware as you can be in all of the valleys. Really look around you, because, you know, the points where, you know, everybody else is losing their head around you are actually the great points to really learn from what not to do when you're in those situations. And then for those people who you find who actually are embodying values that you relate to or give you positive lessons, remember those people, because, you know, down the line, if you start a company, they might be the great people to come and work with you to make it happen as well.
And I suppose, it's interesting you share that thing about, so you're saying basically be aware, you know, for example, I'll give you an example. So in 2008, 2009, I actually listed a company on AIM, just as in 2009 when it was going slightly in the other direction. And that was definitely a learning for me, is don't do it when your business is at a certain level. You know, you learn from that about how robust you are as an organization. But you fall into some of these traps where you think it's the right thing to do at the time, and you've got all the information in front of you, et cetera, et cetera. So I can relate to that. I mean, I suppose in if you're looking into the future, what are the kind of predictions you've got, I suppose, in relation to what you're seeing in financial services and with 11FS? What's your dreams and goals going forward?
I think it's really interesting, because I think within financial services, I think the whole industry is up for grabs. You know, we talk a lot about the fabric of financial services is changing, whether it's deep seated in the technological side of things, or whether it's who is the competitors in this space. I think so many organizations are just getting to the point where they realize that spending another 5 years on a transformation and another couple of £1 billion is probably not going to get them to where they want to get to. So you see more and more people, as you say earlier on, sort of pressing reset and doing something different. I mean, it's the old joke: if you've got 10 standards and you try to build another one, you've suddenly got 11 standards, right? So I think the thing that people need to learn from building greenfield banks and greenfield propositions is, if you're doing it, you've got to decommission something, because if you're not decommissioning something, you're just adding to the problem. And actually, I mean, a lot of the work we're doing right now.
But that requires a lot of bravery, I think. I think it's actually people being brave enough to actually embrace that and like grab the nettle and actually do something about it, rather than just rolling with it. That's what I've observed when I've been working in financial services. They just kind of roll with it, some people.
I think it's embracing it, but it's also making it small, because, I mean, if everything is big, then actually you have to be really certain. So if you have to be really certain, then you're probably going to take a long time. And if you take a long time, you're probably going to spend a lot of money, and you're going to incur a lot of risk, which is perverse given you're actually trying to de-risk it. So, for us, if you look at a lot of we're working with one client right now, huge credit card book, but actually, in order to change their credit card system, we've built one credit card product. Now we can run that credit card product at, I think it's about 7% of the system cost of the other system. Because actually what we're doing is we're not saying we're going to replace all of the other systems and then just flick a switch and turn one off and the other one on. We're going to prove it and de-risk it internally to the organization and get the operating rhythm and the operating processes in place. That means
put new acquisition onto that new proposition and then move time or something. Is that you thinking?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Because when you can run it for 7% of the cost and you can create a new product in 19 seconds rather than 9 months, then actually what's the risk at that stage? Because you can de-risk it so heavily. So for us, I think more and more people are going to do that. Look, is it better to restart and build the new thing? Because actually, again, being very empathetic to banks have got all of the money and all of the customers. FinTech is very exciting, but what it's teaching them is how to do it, not what to do. And actually, I think over the next, 5-10 year horizon, I think what we're going to see is more and more banks pressing that reset button to some form or another. Because not only from a technological perspective, but actually from a cultural perspective, it really allows them to start as they really want to be. And that's a really exciting thing to do.
But what you're saying there is it's ways of working. That's the thing that's actually the change. Which is back to the people dimension again, about actually a new operating model, a new way of delivering change. And not falling to a waterfall kind of malarkey that people have previously hid behind, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, show me one startup that has an IT department. They just don't have it. They have small multidisciplinary teams of engineers, product people, designers who are really focused on the customer problem that they're solving. The problem almost becomes a lot of consultancies have done a lot of time looking at agile at scale and these types of things. But I really feel like it's for me, breaking down those silos internally, all of this comes back to technology only gives you the ability, culture makes it possible.
Yeah. So what would be some of the kind of, I suppose, plans around 11FS then for the next 5-10 years? What's your dreams and goal around that? Well, I mean, how big are you from a headcount point of view at the moment? How big are you? I know you've got multiple locations you're operating out of.
Yeah, we just tipped over 200 people. Over the next year will double in size. We're planning on kind of expanding out into multiple geographies from an industry perspective. And actually, I mean, we've built brand new greenfield banks in the UK with Natwest, or over in Hong Kong with Standard Chartered, and over in the US as well. So there's an interesting thing that's sort of happening, which is almost the change curve. The first 3 or 4% of people who are, really looking and brave enough to do something different. And then actually what we're sort of seeing is those 3 or 4% lead to the 10 and the 20 and the 30. So, I fully expect over the next, 5 years that, we'll be here with 4,000 or 5,000 people in 20 plus locations doing various different things. I think the thing I'm most excited about, if I'm honest with you, is a product that we're building out, which is a core banking system called Foundry. We're actually building it out in partnership with DNB, who are the biggest Nordic banking group. And for me, that has the potential to be truly altering of the fabric of financial services, because I mean, if you can spin up a brand new bank in under 11 minutes, then actually it just brings so much more potential to the industry.
Unbelievable. Yeah, I mean, I used to work for a small German software company called SAP, so you may have heard of them. So they spent about, I don't know, I think they're still trying to do it, actually. They spent about 20, 30 years trying to penetrate the banking industry with core banking. And but obviously some specialists in there. So
do you know what's really interesting? I spent so one of my summer jobs when I was doing my A-levels was actually while I was doing a computing A-level and business and all that type of stuff. I actually went into a dental surgery. It was a chain of dentistries, and worked with SAP consultants. So this was me when I was 19, working with SAP consultants to put in R3.
Really? Oh wow!
Yeah. And what you sort of find
in the 90s,
what you sort of find quickly is actually it's a lot of customization. There is a big, one size product, and then it's a lot of customization around how the organization works. What I sort of find is that within banking, that still happens now. And every bank kind of thinks that they're some snowflake about how their process works. When the reality is the worst thing you can do with any system is customize it to you, because the minute you customize it to you, you're 10xing the cost of the running that operation.
It? Yeah, exactly.
So this is, the rise of SaaS and PaaS-based systems move people to best-in-class processes rather than the way that you've done it for the last 50 years. And I think that's a really good thing for the industry, but and I think we'll see a lot more of that as well.
It's very refreshing. I'll be honest with you, David. It's very refreshing to hear how articulate you are at the technology side of it. You come across incredibly clear on that. So I think if you're going out there and obviously engaging with those the C-level execs in the banks, I think I can see why you're getting the traction, because they need they will need somebody to talk to, don't they? They need somebody to trust and somebody to talk to in that kind of discussion about what's the right way to go.
Look, when we started the company,
it reminds me of a certain person. I don't know if you know, so Roy Singham. I don't know if you know Roy Singham. He was the founder of ThoughtWorks.
Okay.
ThoughtWorks, yeah. And you guys, just give you some feedback. You guys remind me of ThoughtWorks, 10, 20 years ago, because they were very disruptive. They were very thoughtful. They were very, data-based. They were very kind of thinking about actually how do you do this differently. Eventually, they got bought by Apex. I think it was some kind of VC firm or PE firm. So I think my feedback to you is everybody's got a choice at some point, but the biggest challenge I can see with LMFS is you're going to get somebody's going to try and buy you because you're so good, yeah. And I think the question for you is then, do you stay close to your mission and stay and keep doing what you're doing? Because I think the industry and the organization, or the organizations, need you to be in the world. That's my observation with what you're doing. You're challenging the status quo.
Yeah, definitely. From that's happened already. Bizarrely, 4 years.
Really?
We've had about 5 or 6 offers to buyers from the big boys.
I'm not surprised.
I think to start with, I think it was to stop us, and now it's because I think we're genuinely a threat now. Look, we've won Consultancy of the Year in the UK last 2 years in a row at the British Bank Awards. We're building up momentum. But fundamentally, the thing that we set out to do with this business, we're nowhere near done yet. I talk about digital banking being 1% finished, but we are as well. So we're really passionate about solving these problems. We really believe that actually the future is very different from the past, but we're painfully empathetic because we've been there and done it. So I think the authenticity comes through just actually really wanting to help people fix real problems. And because of that, actually, whether it's me or Jason or Leader or Sarah Kachansky or whoever, we're all like this, which is the best thing, because actually it means we're all very much ourselves at work and able to then really sort of lean in and have fun doing what we're doing. So for me, that's a great compliment. I just get the vibe. It's just the vibe comes across with how you talk. The vibe comes across in how you communicate to the world of what you do. And I'm not surprised you've been approached by multiple companies, because people just want to get involved in the vibe. It's just it's infectious. Yeah, it's just it is. That's what we try and do. If we are passionate, if we are positive, and if we're here to really make an impact happen, then you find that it turns up the magnet and it turns up the gravity for really exciting people to come and want to either do things with us or do things for us. And it's an interesting one. So, the main thing for me is, having worked in a lot of places and done a lot of things, then, at this stage, I want to be having fun. I want to be having impact. And I'm having more of both of those things than ever before.
Thanks for sharing that, because I think it's important. And I think that the reason why I can relate to it is because one of the businesses I set up, a company called Advisem, which was actually, I created about nearly 20 years ago to basically take on the big four. what I did was I made a decision to sell it, to list it on the market. And I know now we shouldn't have done it, because what I was trying to do is create the culture and the approach to how you do consulting and how you support businesses in a similar way to what you're doing. Like, well, it wasn't specifically on banking and financial services, but a lot of the ethos and the cultural piece around looking after people and making sure they look after your customers, all that kind of good stuff. It's an
interesting challenge.
It's very analogous. So I think you're spot on. The stuff you talk about, and your CEO approached your dialogue around your CEO remit, I think is very admirable. And honestly, it's very good, very, very good.
I think it's interesting because, I mean, like you say, it really depends on where people's end game is, and actually you can say this for a lot of the fintechs as well. Is are they really there to change the industry, or are they there for a big exit? And I mean, this is why I've always been anti VC, if I'm honest with you, because I actually like being in a situation where the decisions around what we do are ours, not somebody else's. Because we started this company with a purpose. We really run it with a purpose, and because of that, then actually I'd like to stay in the decision making section of that sort of scenario. So I think a lot of organizations can get themselves into a difficulty because they're being lent on by VCs who are looking for short-term returns versus long-term benefit. We can make decisions for 10 years rather than 2, and that's a great place to be.
Being an owner leader, being your own shopkeeper, or your own bank manager. Yeah.
Well, and actually, I mean, for everybody as well, we were opening up a share scheme in the company where we've got all of these processes in place. We want everybody to, eat every biscuit like it's their own type vibe. It's important to me that people care, and because of that, then it makes us act and talk and behave in a certain way, which so far so good. I'm sure it'll get me into trouble at some point, but it hasn't just yet.
Well, no, driving that ownership into all levels of the organisation. You get a new person that joins even from university as an intern, and then how they go through that whole journey. It's great.
I mean, that's happened. We've literally, we had a bunch of people join us, interns, literally from university, who are now delivering really impactful things across our business. One of them data into one of the products that we've built, another one of the senior producers on the podcast that we do. So it's great. I mean, one of our the biggest things that I kind of like is I've in my career, I've sort of found people who revere people within their own skill set. But I found a thing to really hire on is people who revere other people's skill sets. You want somebody who's very, very good at what they do, but also very envious of what other people can do as well. Because if you can get engineers who revere product people, or audio people who revere designers, then actually what happens is it's like music. I mean, if you get some musicians of a similar level together and just get them to play together, you find they can figure it out and work their way through, and they stop to give each other the solo and for a bit, and one of them is supporting the other one. I see business very much like that. If you can, keep my job really is to be the metronome for the business and just setting the tone. And once that tone is set, then you find other people fill in all the good bits.
Well, there's a couple of things here. Just final points I was going to make was pollination, which is what you're talking about there, with pollination between the different roles. Yeah. And I must admit, when I saw your album cover, of your new, what is it? I don't know. You wouldn't call it a ringtone. What do you call it? Like your brand.
Audio brand. Yeah.
Your audio brand with that picture with where your head was upside down. I was thinking, oh my God, brilliant. Because it was a spoof of what's it called, that famous album, wasn't it?
De La Souls, I think, wasn't it?
De La Soul, three's the magic number. Yeah, brilliant, absolutely inspired. So
I don't rule out an album at some point. You never know.
Well, you've got the hat on, so you can do the kind of the DJ stuff. Okay, thank you very much for your time today. I know you're a busy guy, so I know we've had a an accelerated session today. But and next time, I would love to have a gin and tonic with you. I'll get that little surprise present to you through Zoe. And all I can say to you is, David, is keep it up, and please continue to make 11FS and what you do in your career and what you're doing is as legendary as it already is today. It's fantastic to see.
No problem. We'll give it a good go. Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you for your time.